Hello, my name is Calvin from Defund the BBC. Today I'm joined by Mike, who is a journalist and radio presenter, best known for the Independent Republic of Mike Graham on Talk Radio. Before Mike's radio career, he was a prominent Fleet Street journalist for 25 years. He's been the editor of the Scottish Daily Mirror, assistant editor of the Daily Express, the same paper in which he also covered the Bosnian War in 1992. And while in New York, he ran his news agency, supplying news, features, pictures to the international media. Mike Graham, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Very, very kind of you to ask me. Thank you, Calvin. I'm very pleased to be here. It's quite a time for those of us who are fighting back against the woke majority of people, but they're not the woke majority of people, are they? They make it seem like they are.
Because they're more vocal than the rest of us, aren't they? It is weird, I must say, me asking you the questions rather than you asking me, but let's go for one. So it's fair to say, Mike, from all that experience that I just mentioned, working in various parts of the media, broadcast, print, and your own agency, you have a decent idea as to how the landscape has changed in the last 20 to 30 years. In that time, how do you think the BBC has failed to keep up with the pace?
Well, I think the BBC, it was described in the Telegraph today by I'm not quite sure who this was because the person wasn't named, but it was described by somebody who regarded themselves as a working class presenter, as like walking into a gated community for the privileged. And I think that's exactly what's gone wrong with the BBC, is that instead of having ordinary men and women working there from relatively ordinary backgrounds when, Britain was a much more, I would say, even sort of socially mobile country, because I think the problem in Britain now is that social mobility has completely and utterly stalled. And I think it started with the Tony Blair generation and it's continued through David Cameron and now Boris Johnson, whereby if you're born into a poor working class family, you've got much less chance now of getting a job at the BBC than you would have had in the 80s when Margaret Thatcher was in charge of this country, because she was all about getting people into the stock market, getting people into, the civil service, getting people into jobs that they previously never thought of doing. And I think now we've got this kind of elite of university educated, middle class kids, of people who can afford to put them through college and who can afford to let them get jobs that don't pay terribly well in their early 20s, which most ordinary people can't afford to do. And so we've now got a media, and the BBC in particular, run by very, very similar people who are totally out of touch with ordinary people in the street.
I think it's spot on there. We could do with another Margaret Thatcher right now, couldn't we? Defunding the BBC has been a constant source of conversation on Talk Radio, obviously. What has been the one issue relating to the corporation which has triggered your listeners the most?
Well, I think the recent survey, which showed that something like 6% of the population of this country trusts the BBC. I think it was always seen as a relatively kind of neutral organisation, but it's morphed into this incredibly biased news organisation. I mean, the BBC News around the world used to be absolutely the kind of the gold standard. If BBC reported it, you knew it must be true. That's not the case anymore. The BBC now reports things that they want you to know about and doesn't report other things that they don't want you to know about.
Yeah, I mean, the bias is completely blatant. We see it across the board, but over the period of your career in the media industry, have you ever considered or been approached to work at the BBC?
I never have. No, I mean, I've done things with them. When my first kind of radio experience, funnily enough, was doing little pieces with 5 Live, because when I was at the Express, they used to do this thing where they would have, of course, only the BBC could afford to do this. They had a little van and they would drive it over to the Express building, park it outside, and you would go down into this mobile recording studio, which presumably cost, several £100,000 to put together. And you tell them what was in the paper tomorrow. And so I used to do that from time to time. I then went up to Scotland, worked in Scotland for a while, started doing bits and pieces on BBC Scotland. They would wheel me out as the sort of token tabloid journalist to try and explain, for example, why we were victimising John Leslie, who was at the centre of a sort of rape allegation and all this kind of thing. And then I started doing things. I actually did a show, believe it or not, for BBC Scotland early in my radio career, which was so overstaffed compared to what we do in the commercial sector. It was a Sunday show, it was an hour long. I think I had 4 guests in the studio, another 2 guests on the phone, one of whom was Alex Salmond on occasion, I remember. And I had a producer that worked with me from Tuesday all the way through until the Sunday morning. And then there was more producers in the office. And when I got to the BBC building in Scotland to actually do the show, there was a woman who just made the tea. And she had a trolley and she pushed it around. And one day she came up and said, "I'm sorry, there's no milk today." And I said, "Why is there no milk today?" And she said, "The guy that organises the milk isn't in." And I was like, "Sorry." I'd come from this commercial radio station in Edinburgh, which I'd been fired from because they thought I was spending too much money, called Talk 107, and I'd never seen anything like it. They had a separate. I mean, I'm told that, for example, when they do their show 606 Live, they have a separate producer for each division of football. So if you're getting Premier League results, you've got one person that comes in and gives you some pieces of paper. If it's somebody in the Championship, they get somebody else to do it, and all the way down to sort of Division 4. They've got a specific person. That's all they do.
Imagine having a tea lady and someone separate to organise the milk. The bloating.
I know.
It's incredible.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And so, yes, I've never been offered it. Funnily enough, when I first started trying to get into journalism, I would apply for any job that I could get my hands on. And I applied for a few BBC jobs, and I never got any, never even got an interview, on the basis that I didn't have a degree, because I'd gone to university for a couple of years, got involved in sort of local journalism, thought, the hell with this degree business. I'm just going to get into paper newspapers because that's what I want to do. And so I was never interviewed by the BBC because you must have a degree.
Well, it's all about box ticking, isn't it? It's just those boxes tend to change from time to time, as we've seen this week.
Yeah.
And the license fee has gone up, of course, to £159. We want MPs to abolish it before the next charter. More than 110,000 people have signed a petition calling for a bill for it to be dropped as soon as possible. But do you think Boris Johnson will listen?
I think he's going to put pressure on the BBC because we've got this new Director General, Tim Davie, who hasn't proved to be quite as much of a new broom as he said he was going to be. I mean, he's trying his best, I think, but you can imagine it must be like the worst civil service department, probably worse than the Home Office, trying to get anybody to change their mind, because they've got hordes and hordes of sort of middle and upper management, people who I presume do nothing at all. But the appointment of Rishi Sunak's mate, who's now the chairman, I think might shake things up a little bit quicker, because I think that will be where the political pressure is brought. I think they'll have to look at the structure. And I think, like all good changes, they'll have to come up with a reason to do it and a way to do it. You can't just say, let's get rid of the license fee and see what happens. You'd have to kind of structure it, I think, in such a way. I'm sure you guys have discussed this. Can you pay for parts of it and get other parts of it for free? I haven't really looked at that. I don't know how that would look. But I certainly think that they need to break up the way that they run it, because it's not feasible anymore.
No, it's not. A BBC spokesman said to us recently, the license fee remains the agreed method of funding in the BBC Charter until at least 2027, and we will continue to offer great value for money. So, Mike, do you feel like the BBC is offering great value for money?
Well, I mean, when people say for the purposes of around about 20 quid a week or whatever it is, 10 quid a week or less, it's worth the money. But is it really worth the money when you think of what else they could be doing with that money? Because despite the fact that they pull in a couple of £1 billion a year from the license fee, apparently they can't actually make profit. They still make a loss. And, I find that extraordinary. They've got way too many people working there. Many of them are on very, very ridiculously high salaries, like Gary Lineker, like some of the people on the big sort of television shows. I mean, you should not be getting paid £500,000 plus to work for the BBC. It's a state broadcaster, And when they say, oh, well, it's commensurate with, the commercial sector. Well, no, it's not. There's not many people at Talk Radio getting paid £500,000. And people would say, well, you haven't got the reach that the BBC have got. Well, not yet. But, we're getting there. And pretty soon there's going to be GB News, which is going to be another alternative. I mean, one of the things we did today was Plank of the Week. I put the Royal Television Society on there this week because they nominated Sky News as the best news channel in Britain, to which we all just fell about laughing, because Sky used to be a great channel, but all it's got as any kind of rival is BBC News Channel. And there are 3 BBC News channels, and they're all rubbish.
Well, this is it. They stifle competition, don't they? How can an independent station like Talk Radio compete with all the stations being pushed out by BBC with the same kind of woke agenda on every single channel?
Yeah, well, they've got 63 separate local radio stations, and that includes where I live in the southeast of England, Radio Kent, Radio Surrey, and Radio Sussex. Now, you're not going to tell me that you couldn't make that into one station. I mean, why on earth does Kent need its own radio station, which is different from Sussex, which is different from London, which is different from Shropshire, which is different from Derby? I mean, it's a nonsense, totally ridiculous.
And we alluded to it earlier, but this diversity quota thing is an issue. And despite promises to tackle the bias in the corporation, new BBC bosses have this week insisted that 95% of their staff will completely debunked unconscious bias training by this point next year.
Right.
How frustrated are you and your listeners with the BBC gaslighting the British public?
Well, apart from anything else, I presume they'll be paying somebody a huge amount of money to come in and teach people how not to be biased. Well, that's all very well, but I wish they'd teach them how not to be biased against British people, because that's what they are. They're not biased against black people or gay people or anybody else. They're biased against British people because apparently, you can see in the background, the reason for me having this particular background is not because I'm some mad racist bigot. It's because, like last night at the proms, and you might remember last year, we all ran a campaign to stop the BBC from banning Real Britannia. Last night at the proms, they didn't want to sing it. They didn't want to do it. And I'm going, why not? What's wrong with waving a flag? I mean, even Sir Keir Starmer has now decided it's a good idea to start waving the Union Jack around. And I just think that they are barking up the wrong tree. I mean, they make this ridiculous kind of assertion that they want to try and get more working class people into the BBC. Well, why does it matter? You know, why do they need quotas for everything? Why don't you just hire people? And if I were the BBC, I think one of the things they should do is have some kind of scholarship scheme for kids from deprived communities, because I think kids from deprived communities can be just as good journalists as anybody else. The idea that they can't and they have to go to university is a nonsense. You know, bring them in, train them up. Even if they don't want to be journalists, they can be tech operators, they can be, you know, editors, they can be behind the cameras, they can do all sorts of things. But at the moment, it's like a private little club, and you only get in it if you've been to university.
Yeah, the problem with these quotas is that it sounds to me like they don't believe in meritocracy. But if they are going to go through with quotas, I'd love to see them have diversity of thought and opinion. And it never comes into the equation, does it?
Never does. No, I mean, you know, I haven't been into a BBC building for a while, but when you ever do, I'm always astonished by the kind of conversations that are going on, and the colour of people's skin is of no consequence. You know, you can see it on television because there are plenty of people from the black and minority ethnic population, but they're all still middle class. They're all talking the same way. They all had a very good education, and they've all got pretty wealthy parents. You know, and it makes no difference what colour they are, or you know what their names are, or what they're even, you know, antecedents from where their parents came from are. They're all very well educated, very nice, thank you very much indeed, comfortable lives, nice big houses, big salaries. You know, where is the diversity there? That's not diversity, is it?
Not at all. Mike, always speaking common sense. Thank you for popping over from the Independent Republic, and we'll see you over there again later in the week.